Hi, this is Mike McNamara, and you're listening to All Marine Radio on your home for it, the one and only All Warrior Radio Network. Welcome to All Marine Radio, and I have to tell you that I will tell you that I was a bit surprised, and I don't know if Dale was or not because he is kind of a big-time guy, but I was surprised. The little thing we did after Secretary Hegseth's meeting in Quantico did gigantic numbers on places like LinkedIn. And it's because it's not a conversation that we haven't had or things that we haven't discussed. And so I'm sure you heard from a lot of people, because I sure did, about that. Were you surprised?
Yeah, but like you said, a lot of it for us in the Marine Corps anyway was, it was like, okay, we already do that, right? 7 out of his 10 points, we're like, yeah, no problem. And a couple of the points were helping us, like, for instance, with the beards and stuff, and that we needed a little help with that to get it back in the box. Yeah, it was surprising, but all good. A lot of people engaged and are interested in what was happening. So that's a good thing in itself that, American people are back involved with our civics and understand what's going on in our government. That's important.
No, I was surprised at the amount of interest that obviously was there to create those kind of numbers before. And I wanted to have Dale come back on because I wanted to do this program for a while. And I get around the Marine Corps certainly a bit. I get around the country a bit and talk to leaders and I think there's a tremendous appetite for leadership conversations with guys who are proven leadership, and yet this world, the people leading in it will tell you is very different, right? And so I wanted to talk to Dale about how do you lead today? Is it different? But the one thing I will tell you that is different about it is I believe that, and maybe it's always been this way, and I didn't know it, but I don't know, and I'll be curious about Dale's thoughts about this. The high-functioning conformist controls bureaucracies. I would say that when I came in the Marine Corps, maybe I was too junior to even see it or notice it, but the guys who led me, I mean, they were grown-ass men. If they wanted your opinion, they didn't shy away from it. They didn't shy away from arguments. They weren't afraid to do it in public. I mean, they were all Vietnam veterans. Some of them were Korean War veterans when I joined, and but I don't know if it's how transparent we are now because everybody can see everything. That the primary element of being a commander is commanding, is you exercising the prerogative of the commander, and are we now so on top of each other that you're not a commander at the battalion level because they can see everything you do? So I want to talk about leading in this modern age, and that's what I asked Dale to come on. But I want to ask him a couple current events questions because we're watching incredible history around the world right now. And the first thing I want to ask you, Dale, is the fact that Hamas gave up those hostages to me was stunning and still is. And supposedly the prime movers in that were Qatar and Turkey. That would have been a pretty interesting phone call to be a part of. I would just, what, what were your thoughts about that? And what do you think got said? And why would Qatar and Turkey lean on them? Do you have any insight? You have any clue? You have a hunch?
Yeah, I mean, it is huge that they gave up their one chip, their one big chip that they had in their pocket. That probably has kept them, a lot of their leadership alive. But I will say they don't have Iran to lean on to back them like they've always had before.
Right.
They got to find a new horse to ride, right? A new backer, and maybe it's Turkey and Qatar and Saudi Arabia's got to be part of that. Even Egypt. So they got to switch horses here because Iran has lost a significant amount of its influence and power and money
Yeah,
and
in the
they
whole
can't.
region.
And I don't think they can count. They're smart enough to say, we can't count on Iran, so we got to go. And if and the rest of the Middle East is fed up with this and wants to see peace. So that may be it. I mean, I don't know what else it could be, right?
Right.
Because that is
Well,
their
let
that
me,
was their one tip.
the only other thought I had, and some of you don't know this, but you can see Dale is wearing his Georgia Bulldog apparel today. But
Go
Dale,
dogs.
the women in Dale's family are huge Atlanta Braves fans.
Yeah,
Okay. Huge. And so the strike in the gutter by the Israelis, which shocked a lot of people, right? Do you think that the people that lead there said, wait a minute, we can't have this. We can't be next on the target group for the Israelis. But if they're willing to do that, that means we are on that list. And look, we've never signed up for that.
yeah.
Do you think? And again, this is all speculation on our part as we sit around and watch this history unfold in front of us.
All right.
Um, do you think that entered into the calculus?
Yeah, could have. I mean, they're not a powerful country when it comes to their military now, obviously. Um, I also just believe that the entire Middle East, like I said before, the powers to be are fed up with it,
Right.
with what Hamas has been doing and what they do to their own people. I mean, look at what's happened in the last couple of weeks. I mean,
Yeah.
they're executing their own people in the streets. That anybody that stood against them at all.
But again, I mean, anybody who spent any time in the region, were you surprised at that?
Yes. Well, I was surprised that Israel actually struck inside the Qatar.
No, were you surprised when the
Oh
ceasefire was announced that they went and just started whacking people?
no,
Yeah,
they're savages.
yeah, it's business. That's
No,
business as usual. That is
right,
the way it is.
right.
Let me ask you one more question about the Middle East, and then I want to ask you a quick question about China and the president's trip out there. Um, How does this thing get sorted out? Now we're into phase two, which I don't know how well defined it is. So as you look at it and you watch, you have to somehow or other this notion of disarming Hamas, which they say they're not going to do. Who's going to do that? Um, because I believe
It's got
I believe
it's got
the Israelis believe that, hey, ultimately we're going to have to go in and do that. Everybody else can play this game, but ultimately we're going to have to go back in there and do that. And so, and yet there is, I haven't even seen a good number in terms of quantifying what it's going to take to rebuild Gaza. But that's a huge number with money coming in from all over the world, right? And don't think that the people in the region aren't looking at that and saying, we want a piece of that. So is the security force, and Will Costantini said this, it's a business deal. We'll provide security forces in exchange for this percent of the contract or some preferential treatment. How do you see that whole phase two and the security piece? You have any thoughts on that?
yeah, but most of that security force has got to be Muslim. Got to be from the Muslim world. It won't work if it's Israel. It won't work if it's any of the Western powers. It's got to be, and predominantly from the Arab world. But Turkey's got to have a big piece in it. Egypt's got to have a big piece in it. I mean, I don't see it working any other way. If we're going to rely on the rest of the world to do this, it won't. It's going to be extremely difficult. It has to be Muslims in there doing it.
All right.
I would think. I mean, and you're right. It's just going. A lot of people's going to make a lot of money off of rebuilding Gaza, and it's going to take a long time. But in the long run, the Palestinian people maybe. I mean, I hate to even say the word, but maybe they can have peace. I mean, our whole lifetime we've been saying this. This is an unanswerable problem, and maybe we were wrong. I mean, I've heard so many people saying there's no fix. It's unanswerable. It can't be fixed, right? This will never. And actually, there's a chance anyway, a bigger chance than we've had in a long, long time, I think.
ever. I mean, I think in my lifetime, certainly that I've never. I mean, they've been at war the whole time. You
Yeah.
know, in some state of it. Like, quick question about China. The president, fresh off his success in the Middle East, um, and if you're paying attention to domestic politics, don't listen to what politicians say. But if you go on YouTube, Instagram, and you begin watching reels about what the citizens of Memphis, Washington, D. are posting about what's going on in their communities now that the National Guard is helping out the police and whatnot. Um, a love fest for the president. Again, don't listen to politicians, but if you listen to the people, and so he goes there with, a lot of wind behind him, and but he knows that the United States needs China, and we need the rare earth minerals and for our nation, and then the Chinese.
China need us.
Yeah, the Chinese need us more though because they're a manufacturing nation and they've got to have access to the greatest consumer on the planet. So, what are you particularly looking for out of that's going to come out of that meeting? Or is there anything you're because you do spend a lot of time on the Pacific? Is there
Yeah.
anything you're specifically looking for?
I mean, it's a business deal, I think, in our President Trump's mind. I really do believe that, right? I mean, he wants to. He's got the tariffs hanging over their head. If he can lower the tariffs, they start buying our soybean. They'll buy some of our energy. We'll help them find energy from the Middle East with what he's doing there, because 70% of China's energy comes from outside their country, and it's the same as their food. So the two most important things for them to survive is energy and food, and that has to be part of the deal. And I think that the president knows that, and he will use that as leverage. But it's a business deal, and we want something from them, just like you said. We need their, in the short term, mid term, maybe long term. We wean ourselves off of their rare minerals, but it ain't gonna be for a while.
Right,
That just doesn't happen overnight. Same
right,
with the semiconductors when we talked about with Taiwan, right? We're
right.
trying to do some of that out, in Arizona and a couple other places, trying to get that going. But that's not an easy nut to crack. So neither is the rare earths and the amount that we need to keep our economy going. So I think he sees this as a business transaction, and I believe he believes that if you do business, and it helps stabilize the threat of war.
Yeah,
At the same time, you got to have a strong military that can back it up too, right? So
yeah. No, fascinating, right? To watch it, right?
yeah,
And so we're going to
yeah,
see. And so they've already announced a framework, evidently, of a trade agreement, and whatnot. But it'll be very interesting to see him. And then he said, "Look, I'll extend my trip. I want to go
yeah.
see the guy in North Korea."
Well, he said that he would have to come to South Korea.
Oh, well,
Well, that's where he's meeting Xi in South Korea. So he just leaving Japan. His last stops in South Korea. She's coming to South Korea for them to meet, and then he said, "I'll stay a little longer if Kim Jong Un comes down to South Korea to meet me." That's what he said. He's not going up there.
no, I didn't mean that he would go to North Korea, but that he would meet with him.
Yeah,
But I mean, he's a he's a he's a fascinating guy to watch, right? And the one thing that Donald Trump understands.
one way of putting it.
Yeah, exactly. But he understands leverage though, and he understands the leverage he has in the greatest economy on the planet and how other people need him.
Yeah, who was it the other day? I forget who it was. It was a Republican that was saying, "Hey, I don't listen to what he says. I watch what he does." Because if you listen to what he says, I forget who it was. He basically says it drives me crazy, but I watch what he does, and I support most of it. It was a prominent Republican that said, I don't remember who it was, but that's kind of, watch what he does, I guess.
You
It's
know, I saw him ask a question the other day, and they said, do you think you're going to have to go to Congress um, um, with what you're doing in the Gulf of America? And blowing up these vessels carrying drugs and what like that. And he says, I don't think so. I think we're just going to blow them up because they're bringing poison that kills Americans. And I think that's what we're going to do. Right?
There is a little precedence for this, and I was part of it. 1989, Second Lieutenant Alford, I was there when we invaded Panama, took down Noriega, and he was an indicted drug lord, and he died in a prison in Miami. We put him in jail. We tried him, put him in jail, and he died in our prison. And that was Papa Bush did that. He didn't go to Congress to ask, and there was thousands. I mean, the whole 82nd Airborne jumped into Panama.
Right. Right before Christmas, right?
The 19th, the night of the 19th. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember like it's yesterday when they started handing out hand grenades and claymores. I was like, "Uh-oh, this shit's for real." We already had bullets. We were already patrolling in the Erhan tank farm, and
Right.
really we were poking the bear, trying to get him. And he finally did something that allowed Bush to invade, our president to invade. Yeah, but when they handed out hand grenades, real hand grenades, and real claymores, and laws back then, you had those laws that you
Right.
shoot and
Right.
and then destroy it, right? Because we didn't get we wasn't patrolling with those three pieces of gear. Right? It was like, this is
Right.
real.
And who are you with?
Kilo Company, 3rd Battalion, 6th Marines. I had
Get
a third
out.
third platoon, rifle platoon commander, Second Lieutenant Alford.
My son's company.
He had Kilo 36.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
I think. I think. I'm pretty sure it was Kilo.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about leadership. Do you think that it's different? Because everybody wants to believe it's different. Do you think that leadership is a whole lot different? And again, so and I don't mean general officer leadership because I hope what we talk about is, for, junior leaders,
Right.
NCOs, staff sergeants, gunnies, you know, but I know a lot of this applies to everybody, but do you believe leadership's different?
No, I believe that we got away from it because there were some policies that made people uh, change how they did leadership. Yeah,
Yeah, that's pretty cool. What just happened?
yeah, it's somebody's calling in a
Oh,
robo call. I paid like $130 for one of those robo blockers. It works about a third of the time, right? It blocks about a third. It catches, but the other 2/3 bugs.
there must be a lot of money in all of that
I don't
because
know.
it
Yeah,
goes on all day long.
I don't know. Um, I believe that over there was a time there 7 or 8, 10 years ago when we started farming out our responsibility to take care of the Marines. We hired all we hired all these clinical people that came in, and if a Marine had a problem, you just sent him to somebody, him or her. The staff NCO didn't sit down kneecap to kneecap, talk through, figure out what's going on with this Marine. We farmed out our leadership responsibility, and I think that was not intentional. And our leaders were trying to do the right thing, because we were in the midst of a war. We had suicides, we had PTSD going on, and we just spent money to try to fix it. And what happened was our young staff NCOs, and officers advocated their leadership to a hired civilian.
Now,
We had bunches of them.
and
I
I
mean,
will tell you this, wherever I go in the Marine Corps, recruiting command, all three MEFs, when I taught, I do a leader class, and say, let me build you a terrain model of the world you live in, because I didn't know anything. I didn't know a whole lot about this world, right? I do now. And at some point, somebody will come up to me or put their hand up and say, Mac, I was told last week, right? And I don't want to say who told me this, but it was an enlisted leader senior to me. That's not my job anymore. My job is to get them to mental health
right,
and butt the fuck out.
Well,
And
that's the problem.
you hear that, and then I look and say, "Do you go to the birthday ball?" And they say, "Yeah." I said, "Do you listen to General Legeune's message?"
Right.
How does that statement and General Legeune's message exist in the same institution? He
Right.
said, "Well, I don't believe that." I said, "Who changed your life?" He said, "Well, I joined because I had to get away from my family. It was a disaster, and the Marine Corps is my family, but my staff sergeant, he changed my life." He said, "I still talk to him all the time." And I said, "But so you've got to be that guy." But so just to illustrate your point, Dale, and I'm not that didn't happen. That these conversations didn't happen to me 7 years ago, right? They happen to me on a regular basis wherever I go, and so evidence of just how spot on you are.
Yeah, you think it's maybe it's got a chance to swing back now, right? Um, Kind of like the last podcast we did, right? There's some directives in those 10 points that's going to allow it to swing back into our responsibility as NCOs, staff NCOs, and junior officers. Um, the whole thing with the beards, right? I asked that question in Oak, and I was like, "What's going on here?" And they're like, "Well, so we're not allowed to even ask." Right? That's changed, right? So there's we need our young NCOs and staff NCOs and young officers involved in our Marines' lives. I mean, going to the barracks, spending time in the, I mean, I tell all the time. I think one of your questions was like, the advice. I'm like, when you're in command, it takes a significant amount of your time to do it correctly. People talk about walking around leadership, and very few people actually do it. And walking around leadership happens on Saturday night, Sunday morning, right? Sunday morning in the barracks when you find that young Marine who's so hung over that he can't lift his head off the pillow and he's puked on his pillow, right? And he's only 19 years old. And you're not going to bust him for drinking. What you're going to do is find out what's going on in his life because he'll be the guy to put a gun in his mouth and kill himself for
And
some reason.
he's never been anywhere near combat or even probably deployed,
Right,
right?
right,
Which is one of the things Neller told me that stunned me. Mac, you have to understand 80 to 90% of our suicide, they've
mm-hmm,
never left the country, let alone
right.
heard a
Yeah,
gun
because
heard a
we're that
gunshot.
because we're not our young leaders aren't involved in their lives because they've been told not to. They've been told to immediately get that kid to a psychiatrist that they find like that, right? And not to figure out what's going on. And that's what prevents it. But that takes a lot of your time. And if you're going to, when you're in
But
leadership
if you're
position,
not doing that, what are you doing? And again, specifically, right? My great frustration as a lieutenant captain was that as officers we're a compartment away, right? And and Dale likes being a leader. So do I, right? I mean, another friend of ours, Dave Furness. I was talking to him about he's the superintendent at BMI now, and I said,
leadership,
"How's it going?" He goes, "Are you kidding me? I love this." He said, "They're so fired up." I said, "And you have a reinforced battalion now." I said, "Do they even know what's going to hit them?" He said, "No." He said, "No." He said, "I love this." He said, I see him every day. I talk to him. I have lunch with him. I work out with him." He said, "It's the best." But if you love doing that,
you
it's
get
what you love the most, right? You
right.
you
Yeah,
meet this human capital that joins the Marine Corps, that looks at the challenge that is the Marine Corps and says, "I want a piece of that."
yeah.
And then you
And
get
as
a
a
chance to taste
leader,
life.
when you're a leader, as a company commander, battalion commander, and on up, as an officer, you got to find that second in charge that's going to run the day to day business, and then you got to trust them. Otherwise, you can't be out at lunch, PT, and walking around in the barracks, going out to ranges, in training with them, around them all the time, where they see you all the time. You've got to have a number two that is running the show, that's got the authority to run the show, can sign most everything, that you have to sign very little. I mean, all of that's part of figuring out how to be a good leader, and particularly the higher up you go. But even as a company commander, I mean, you got to sit down with your XO and say, "Look here, stud, you got picked to be an XO, and you're going to be a second charge, and you're going to run this thing. So you're going to be in this office a lot, and I'm not." And then when you're a company commander, you're going to train your XO to do that, so you can be out right? That's going to be your reward. You got to have those conversations. And a lot of leaders don't do that. A lot of leaders think they have to read everything, touch everything, decide everything. And if you do that, you're not out there touching Marine souls on a daily basis. That's the key. It sounds simple. Very few actually understand it and do it.
Right.
And then
You know,
even more don't have the courage. You got to have the courage to do that. And there's going to be some times when your XO, makes a decision. You're like, damn, I don't know if I'd done that, but you got to shut up, particularly if it works, right? If it got the mission done, it's just not the way you'd have done it, quite right. You just got to shut up, and you can't scold them for it. You might,
but that is the opportunity cost, right? For you,
mm-hmm.
if I'm going to be involved, if I'm going to lead this thing, legitimately lead this thing, and Dave has a great quote that I use in that he said when we were doing post traumatic winning thing at Camp Lejeune. I mean, hell, you might have been there, but he stood up and said, "Look, better human being makes a better Marine, makes a better warfighter, makes us a more lethal warfighting organization. The way you make better Marines is you've got to know them as human beings, not as Marines. You got to get to know
Right.
them." And so what Dale's talking about is sitting there on a range with them, talking about them about a range car or whatever the hell you're doing, right? It's waiting for trucks with them. Hey, how's your grandma? Is she
Yeah.
okay? It's all of that. I care. I give a shit, right?
Just not long ago, an example. I don't think who it was, but so I had a reserve company from Montgomery with me in Afghanistan, 1819, my last deployment as a 2-star. I'm Task Force Southwest, and what we had Ghana. I don't know how you pronounce their in the plural, but men from Ghana that guarded our camp in the daytime.
All right.
But at night, the Marines were in the towers.
Now, would you said Montgomery? Just for
Yeah,
everybody, Montgomery in Alabama.
Alabama. It
All
was
right.
a 23rd, I think 323. It was a company from 323, if I remember right. And I ran into a Marine, and he's like, "Sir, you probably don't remember, but about 2 o'clock in the morning one night, you sat in the post with me for about an hour, and we talked about, what are you going to do?" He was like, behind me, he's trying to go to school. He wanted to be I can't remember right, obviously, but he told me and he says he sat there for my whole, for an hour. I'm like, yeah. So I would do that about 2 to sometimes 3 nights a week. I would set my alarm, put my kid on, and I would go out and go to a post or two, right? And I had a little chart where I said, okay, I went to post 2, and 4 on Tuesday night, and Friday night I'm gonna go to post, right? So I try to hit them all at different times and stuff. During the night, though, the shitty times, right, when everybody wants to sleep and is tired, right? It's that kind of stuff you have to do as a leader. And then Marines will remember you. They'll talk about it, right? That's the difference. And I could go on and on and on. I've done a number of podcasts, and I tell the story about the washer and dryers in 3-6. So I took over around the 1st of March, 2004, Friday. The first group I met with was the NCOs. While everybody went to the club, my wife was mad as hell at me for not showing up to the party, after the change of command. I didn't come down there for like an hour and a half. Everybody was gone. But I spent with the 300 NCOs of that battalion because I knew I had to get them on my side because that battalion was a little bit of a mess. The next weekend, though, I go into the barracks, and it's a disaster. Every one of the rec rooms, there's a recreation room on each deck that's
Mm-hmm.
supposed to have like a TV and a Game Boy and maybe a pool table. It was just piled with broken furniture and shit. And the wash machines and dryers, none of them work. They're all broken. So I did a couple of things. One, the next Monday, I got to 4. I was like, go get me some 7 tons. We're going to haul this shit away. I want it in the dump by the end of the day. every damn one of them. I want all that stuff gone. And two, I bought a handle, half gallon of Jack Daniels, and I found the guys who fix washer and dryers. Now that I was the base commander, I know who they are, right? And where they, but at the time I didn't. But I found them, and I gave them a half a gallon of Jack Daniels, and I said, I need your help. Well, I ended up with a bunch of new washer and dryers, and they
Whoa.
hauled away all the broken ones, and then brought them back fixed. Right. This is all before we went to Afghanistan in April, mid-April. I only had the battalion about 6 weeks before we deployed. And, still to this day, we did a reunion in July up in Chattanooga, and I had a Marine bring up the washer and dryers. He was there when I did that. It's that kind of stuff. You can't fix everything. One of your questions is, what do you tell young leaders? I used to do NCO meetings as a battalion commander. I did it as a captain, as a company commander in Okinawa. At the end of the week, when we got out of the field, I had the staff sergeants take all the Marines, Lance Corporals and below, all the staff NCOs, and it was me, the first sergeant, and the platoon commanders, and the NCOs. And we'd buy a couple of cases of beer. Everybody'd get one, sit around, and we'd talk about the training that we did that week and what we're going to do next week. And then we all went to eat Mongolian barbecue there at Camp Swab. If you remember, the club up there had Mongolian barbecue on Friday night. You'd pile it up. I'd spend you'd spend $25, and then you was asleep by 10 o'clock because you was wore the hell out. Nobody got in trouble. There was nowhere to go in Swab unless you literally got. They had buses that ran down to Kinzer or wherever, and you can get in trouble. But most of my Marines are all into bed because we were training hard. But you got the NCOs involved. Did that as a company commander, right? Do TDGs as a platoon commander with your NCOs, and as a battalion commander. When we were back home, I was only there for 6 weeks before I went to Afghanistan. Went to Afghanistan for 8 months. Came home for 7, and then redeployed to Iraq for 8 more months. Came home, gave up command, right? About 30 months, I think it was. But those months I was home, I'd have an NCO, me, the first sergeant, and NCOs, corporals and sergeants. And you'd have that Lance Corporal said, man, I want to do that. I want to be able to go with the battalion commander. And I'd let the NCOs bitch about, and we'd write down, this needs fixing, this needs fixing, this and that. And you can't fix it all, but if you try and you fix a few of them, they know you care. So that's my advice to the young officers. And when I say young officers, I'm talking about platoon commanders, I'm talking about company commanders, and I'm talking about battalion commanders. After battalion command, you're done touching Marine souls. Your Marines, your troops change from colonel and above. Right? When you're a regimental commander or 06 commander, as a CO of the basic school, my troops were my captains. The 110 captains at the basic school. That was my troop. That's who I could only touch their souls. Lieutenants were blobless faces to me, right? Just like at Parris Island as a captain, it was the drill instructors who I cared about. Recruits were a blobless face. If I took care of the drill instructors take care of recruits. And if I took care of the captains at the basic school, they took care of the lieutenants, is the way I thought. So your troops change as you move up. Hell, my last few years, I had training command. I had 17 06s. Those were my troops. It took all my time and energy to get around to see those 17 commands, those 06 commands. As commanding the base, I had all the other little bases commanded by 06s.
But other than that audience changing, it's the same
the same
shtick,
shit.
right?
Right. You're
It's
just
the
not
same
touching.
shtick.
Yes, that's why I always say being a general sucked, right? Because you don't get to touch Marine souls like it. Battalion command, I tell people all the time, company and battalion command, particularly as an infantry guy, but as a logistician, for a pilot, it's squadron command, right? Because they got to have their XO maintenance officer, OPSO stuff. But really, the first time they command is, and even then, I would think that you got to really take care of you, particularly like in a skid squadron where you got so many pilots. It's different, but it's still the same. You got to figure out who that group that is your main effort that's going to be What makes your unit successful? Who?
And,
What is that
and
for
then and
for
then
an infantry company or infantry battalion? Infantry company is NCOs. For an infantry battalion, it's still NCOs, but it's staff NCOs matter a hell of a lot more as a battalion commander, and then of course your company grade officers.
okay, so
Um,
let me ask you a question because people will hear that, and I say a similar thing. And one of the things I say is you've got to let them get to know you. Okay. So I'm curious about that. So, this whole separation, being an officer, we're not enlisted, right? And so there's a certain amount of standoff that we need to keep, which is professional. But tell people about that because
yeah, I mean
people would, yeah,
for
people
me
would tell me
also,
like, Mac, you're borderline unprofessional. And I would say, I don't care. I love these guys. I like hanging out. I've been playing team sports my whole life.
right?
Nobody ever gets confused. But for me to sit down with them, for me to have a good time with them, for me to talk to them, I said, but here's the magic sauce, man. They get to know me
Yeah,
and all the things I do. So I'd be curious your thoughts on that. You know,
that's yes. One first thing I'll caveat that is I had even though I wasn't enlisted in active duty, being prior enlisted, going through Paris Island helps with your Marines when they know that hey, he went through boot camp like we did before he became an officer. That it just helps. It's just a fact, and you kind of use that to your advantage when in order to get to know Marines, right? Shared shared misery. Nothing like shared misery to bring you together, right?
right?
So
It's the
they
truth,
know
though, right?
it is the truth, and it's so I've never been. If I anybody ever said anything to me about they thought I was too close to the Marines, I didn't listen because I think I mean you just got to be smart, right? You're just right. I many occasions pulled up to a picnic table behind the barracks, bum a dip of snuff and bum a beer and sit there and bullshit and drink their beer and dip their snuff. That was part of my stick, particularly the Copenhagen. You know? When I got up on the picnic table, they just throw Copenhagen cans at me, right? Because they know I was going to ask for one. Because I've never bought a can of Copenhagen in my life. I bought,
One of
I,
those guys. Oh,
yeah,
you're quitting too.
right.
Yeah. Let me have one of those. No, one of the great compliments I would get from Marines would be like, "So are you prior enlisted?" And I'd say, "Nah, man, I'm just cool." And then, right?
Yeah.
And you can imagine that, and you would hear them saying, "I fucking told you not." Cause you know what he's gonna do with that now? I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna jam that up your ass every which way but Sunday. And
Yeah.
they'd be laughing, but they want to get to know you. And in particular, if you're a staff NCO, they join to meet you, right? They've seen you, they want to meet you. And that's why this notion of the person that's going to fix them is outside of our tribe, and they're going to go see that person every other week, once a week, and you're with them every day. 10 hours a day, maybe longer on a lot of occasions. And so that person has a role to play, no doubt, and it can be helpful if they're good. Okay. But nobody replaces you. And I tell everybody, the best advice I ever got in my life, I got right after a helicopter crash and 4 Marines were killed from my high
Right.
school educated company gunny. He looked at me and said, you're never going to get over this.
Right.
And I tell the story and I told him to fuck off and get away from me. And he said, no. He said, you need to know that. I said, who told you that shit? He said, Vietnam Marines. And I tell people, I've thought about that. Have you ever met Vietnam veterans? And they're like, yeah. I said, they're not the brightest bulbs in the chandelier. So where did they get that? Probably passed down to them from guys in World War II in Korea. Where
Yeah.
did those guys get it? Guys who fought in World War One, guys who fought in the Philippines. I mean, all the places. This was the oral tradition because we didn't have anybody else. And I was so fortunate that my company gunny had that passed along because it's a staff NCO thing because officers don't talk about this, right? But it was the oral tradition, and that's how we did it, right? And now it's so stunning to hear, well, that's not my job anymore.
Well,
It absolutely is your job, and there's nobody that can do it like you either. And that's to me something that's really important. And yet people, and that's why I wanted to have this conversation and quit asking yourself my questions that I sent you. Okay. And I know one of your questions is, but so let me ask you, who gave you the best leadership advice of your life?
Well, this the first person was Paul Allen, who was the XO 36 before I went to Panama. He gave me his second lieutenant brass bars that he wore in Vietnam,
Wow.
and so when you wear them in the field, before we had subdued rank, they turned brown. Then when we got out of the field, he took a little piece of brass and it shined better than anybody's. But they were field, but I still have them. They're in my jewelry box, my Marine Corps jewelry box. And then the second one was John Fulchetti, who when I got back in Panama, gave up the rifle platoon. I became the 81st platoon commander, and he had weapons company. And he came to every one of my promotions, all my change of commands, my retirement. I mean, and then we have a weapons company 3-6 reunion. We've been doing it about 10 or 11 years every year in the spring. In the last 3 or 4 years, we've gone up to Prince William Forest up there to where that camp is, that conservation camp.
Yep, yep,
Up
yep,
there.
yep.
We've used that last few years. So he's was an influence in my life, up still to this day. As I move on forward, Paul LaFavor, who was my battalion commander when I had Kilo 38. Bill Journey was in that battalion, so I think we ended up with Farrell Sullivan was in that battalion.
Wow.
Nick Brown. I think we ended up with seven generals out of that battalion. Paul Rock was our air officer. And then Steve Davis. When I was a battalion commander in combat, he was my regimental commander. I'd served with him in 2-4 on a med float when he had a company and I was the deputy commander for LAVs. And then we were at Paris Island 3 years together. But that year that I was in combat, he was my regimental commander. So, and then I skipped one in there when I was the XO at 2-8 in the March to Baghdad, Royal Mortensen.
Yeah.
So I've named,
So give me a piece of
the
advice.
five,
So
right? Those,
when you were young, what advice really helped you that somebody gave you?
yeah. So Paul Allen telling me that, we just been talking about, you got to get to know your Marines. You got to be with them all the time. You got to go through the hardship that they do. Never, ever be the first in line for anything. Never, ever not being out there. Always be the last one to take comfort, with your Marines. Just those kind of things, mostly those field skills that he had learned, as a young officer in hard times that I used as a second lieutenant in Panama. And then, all those other 4 that I named, which is Fulchetti and then Mortensen, LaFavor, and Steve Davis. I've learned a vast amount from all 4 of them, and I've tied up and watched. And that's it. That's really the guys
Okay.
that I would say that had a
So
huge influence on who I was as a leader.
when you talk to NCOs, you talked about how much time you spent with them. When you talk to NCOs and your staff NCOs, what points are you hell on relative to them?
Well, like we talked about, that they got to touch the Marine souls. I'm telling them the same thing I was told. Who I watched it was just awesome with NCOs and staff NCOs was Fulchetti. He understands how to touch a man's soul. John Fulchetti. He was a great company commander, and I watched him as a brand new first lieutenant. And then, we did Desert Storm
And
together.
then
He was my
what did he do? Why did he make such an impression on you? What did he do with them? How did he do it?
right. He was just such a natural amongst them. He just was so good at going up and like spending time and getting to know them, and they know him, right? And he just had a touch.
Right.
I don't know if it can be taught. I say this all the time. I wonder if leadership can really be taught. We do it at the basic school and stuff, but really, only about 1 out of 4 actually have it. You know.
And that is the interpersonal skills, right?
Mm-hmm.
To relate to another human being and
Yeah.
then make them feel important, make them feel like you care,
Yeah.
right? All of that. Because that's really that,
Trust that
right.
you trust them. You're going to trust them. Yeah. It's all of those things, and I just think it's a lot of it. We talk a lot about it, right? I say this, right, and do it right. When you're in command, you got to be there a lot, all the time, and you got to talk to your family about it because you're going to miss a lot of family time. It's just a fact. To do it
Right.
right, it's hard to do both really well. At least I never really figured it out.
What there is a price to being a good leader.
No
Because
doubt.
right, in a life and death business, right? Um, your oath demands that you tell the truth.
Yeah.
And sometimes telling the truth, and again, I don't mean being an asshole. I mean articulately dissenting or asking a hard question and not being afraid to do that. The way I was raised in the Marine Corps, that was our moral responsibility. We were supposed to do that. And as soon as whoever was in charge made the decision, there was only one thing to say, and that was aye, aye, sir, and then we go execute it. But up to that point, right, I was told that, hey, if you have a question, you better ask it. You're a Marine officer, for God's sakes. This is a
Right.
you bet your life business. Um, but
Or you dissent behind closed doors.
right,
And then if you can't convince them to change, then you either got to follow that, get behind it. And, you hear this all the time, but, I hear people say, you should resign. Well, if you got 20 years, you don't resign, you retire. If you don't have 20 years, you resign your commission, you get out, and you're done.
right.
If you got 20 years or more and you don't disagree and you can't follow it, then you retire. You put your hand up and say, oh, it's time for me to retire. Can't do it. Um,
Is that the advice that you give to
yeah.
officers and staff
Well,
NCOs
this,
that because
yeah.
sometimes you get sideways, right? Sometimes you go to work for somebody who doesn't like you, whose
Mm-hmm.
personality, doesn't agree with you, and then and but a lot of times, you go to work for guys like that, but they're still really good, and so it's not really an issue. It's just not, yeah, he doesn't like he doesn't like me, and I'm not his kind of a guy, and but that shouldn't inhibit. For instance, I got warned when I went to work for John Allen. Mac, John Allen's not your kind of a guy. He was great to me. He was great to me. And we had different personalities, but he saw how hard I worked,
Right.
and I loved, I mean, Dale was the CO of the basic school, one of my favorite jobs ever. There must have been a dozen guys who became generals that were there at the time I was there. And
Mm-hmm.
we used to, that's where I met Dave Furness. He was a first lieutenant when he showed up. And I organized this thing called the Marine Corps University Society based on an idea I read about in The Enlightened Soldier. So I pitched it to John Allen, who's the head of the group chief at IOC. And we started this thing because General Van Riper and Mike Wiley were over at Marine Corps University, and they said, a great idea. Well, we would get all these captains and lieutenants, and we would write, and we'd present papers to each other, and we'd be drinking beer and just rip the shit out of people. And so Dave Burness presented the first paper ever, the 81 millimeter mortar platoon in support of the MEU, right?
Yeah. That's where me and him met on a
Right?
mortar range. Right.
And so, um, but we would get after it. And if your feelings got hurt easily, but it was this idea that came out that there should be a vibrant intellectual. And so
Mm-hmm.
John Allen opened every door for me in the world. He took me to West Point. He sent me to the SOIs to speak and teach that decision-making class that I started teaching.
Yeah.
And so to me, none of that happens if you become afraid that you might hurt somebody's feelings, but if you can't articulately express your dissent about an idea, about something that business, then you're not long for certainly for the Marine Corps. But talk about articulate
Yeah.
dissent because I mean
Well,
you had to
yeah,
do that
yeah.
as a leader.
First thing I'll say is, I say this all the time. It really happens at the battalion and squadron level and above, because in the Marine Corps, if you get selected for battalion squadron command, you've made it. That's the first big gate. You're not going anywhere in the Marine Corps unless you command as an officer, a battalion or squadron. You're not going to be a colonel. You're not going to command as a colonel. You're not going to get a chance to be a general. That's the So it starts really at the battalion level. For some of us, it started at the RS level because your command selected RS. But if you act like this is the last job I'm ever going to do.
Hold on, RS recruiting station, just so everybody knows.
Yeah, recruiting station. Yeah, we started command selection in '95. General Klemp started it. Right when he left the Paris Island and went to recruiting command, he started the command selection process. 94, 90, I think it's 95, maybe 94. Because I went out in 98, and I was probably about the third one that they did. So they started doing a board in command, and we still do that today. But if you can act like this is the last job I'm ever going to do, and I'm going to do it right, I'm going to make the right decisions, I'm going to do what I believe is right, I'm well read, I've studied, and I know what I should be doing, then you'll do okay. But that's a lot easier said than done. And what I saw is the higher up you go, the harder it is. I believe it was General Pace that said, physical courage is a lot damn easier to do than moral courage at the senior officer level, particularly, in the Pentagon, right, is what he was talking about, at the highest levels.
People don't believe that. People, I
It's,
mean, I tell people with what I do that most Marines that they would rather be shot at than talk about the traumatic events, a lot of them starting when they were children in their life. And people
mm-hmm.
look at me and they're like, I'll say, tell me, is that true? And every one of them says, yep. Getting shot
Yeah.
at's easy, right? That's easy. This to go here to talk about my life, to talk about how I failed, and that's hard. And so the same concept, moral courage.
Or to speak out and say what you truly believe, or do it behind closed doors. To really act like, hey, I'm a battalion commander. I'm going to do this right. I'm going to do the right thing, no matter what. Right? I'm going to say what I believe. I've studied. I've prepared myself my entire, 16 years to command this battalion. But that's not easy. And the higher up you go, the harder it gets. I have a
Why?
little.
Why? Because of the consequences if you do that?
Also, you get power changes you a little bit, right? Right. You got a chance. I made general. I can be a 3-star. And I have a chance to make. It changes people, and it's human nature. So you got to talk to yourself all the time about you're going to do what you believe is right. And you got to look yourself in the mirror and talk to yourself about it a lot, or else you will slip into doing what's expedient, going along to get along.
And
Right.
that's what I call being a high functioning conformist.
Yeah. And I don't make them bad people. A lot of
No.
it's human nature.
Right.
Right. I also have a ditty that I use that I tell young leaders. When I say young leaders, I'm talking battalion commanders below. But I say your peers are more important than your boss, and your Marines are more important than your peers. If you actually can do that and focus down, then you'll be successful in the long run, 99 out of 100 times. But that is not easy. That's not human nature. That doesn't come natural, right? To really care, what your peers think of you, and then you just totally focus on your Marines, and therefore your boss will say he's doing the right thing, and rewards you and promotes you and all the things that everybody wants, right? You know, you get me off. I talk a little bit about standards where we talked about before, but the reason that nobody in the Marine Corps swims, and we should have to swim twice a year for a test, and the reason nobody does is because it's not graded, not briefed on a promotion or a command board. Nobody cares what your swim qual is. They care what your PFT is, and they care what your karate belt is, but they don't care what your swim belt is. So you got to understand human nature in order, and so because human nature makes us not care about it because it's not graded,
Right.
right? So human nature makes us care what the boss thinks because I want to get promoted. I want to move to the next job. I want to be command at the next level. That's just right. We're A personalities. We're driven people. A lot of us that rise up through the ranks. But really, what's important is doing the right thing, focusing down on your Marines, spending a lot of time with them, getting to know their souls, MCU, all the things we've talked about. But the higher up you go, the harder that is.
So I want to kind of paint a picture. So first of all, the quote unquote chicken shit of garrison. Um,
No such thing.
well, and I want to talk about that because the way you are in garrison will be the way you are when you go to war. There, nobody fairy dust you on the flight over, and you magically turn into combat Marines. You either are about attention to detail, you either care about each other, you help each other, you work together, or you don't. And it's all the chicken shit. It's the working parties, it's the picking up trash, it's the painting curbs. Look, you were
It's
talking
this,
about our your washing
it's
machines. Yeah,
just cutting your hair, shaving your face,
all of it.
squaring away your uniforms, all those
It's
things.
everything we do. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and people would make fun of, you know,
Staying fit,
right?
studying,
Raking,
studying.
raking sand, painting the gunny's rocks, putting up his ropes. And look, our shit might not look great, but it's clean and it'll work, right? Because we keep it that way. And that is Marine Corps. And it all gets instilled in you in garrison through all that chicken shit. And then when you go to war, guess what? It's simply different tasks. It's the same process though. And the attention to detail is what saved lives. Right. And so I want you to
Yeah,
talk about that, Dale, because
yeah,
to me, you hear people say stuff and you just shake your head going, you don't even know what you're talking about.
right. Well, and it all starts at boot camp and OCS, but at boot camp in particular. And I worry a little bit about that, but and I don't think that the secretary said it quite right when he talked about, it's okay for a drill instructor to put his hands on a recruit. But that's what he was getting back to. Hey, all the little things that we do in boot camp, get online, get offline, back and forth, back and forth. Never really get to take a shower. You just run through scrubbing with soap as you run through the shower and in or out, right? All those things that makes life miserable, makes you more disciplined, prepares you for combat. That's what some people would call the chicken shit stuff. And that has been the Marine Corps' open secret for many, many years. Is the way that, and because we don't train any harder really than the Army units do. It's what happens before training in the squad bay and what happens after training in the squad bay that makes us different. And we have to retain that in order to stay Marines and who we are as a Marine Corps. And
And,
so
you know,
that carries over into the fleet.
it is. And I'll tell you what, and you could tell me, you could comment on this, but when you talk to people like Dale and like Dave, right, and they're doing battlefield circulation, right, in a foreign country with units engaged with the enemy, they will tell you that it takes about 180 seconds when they get to the location of a unit to figure out if they're worth a shit or not.
Mm-hmm.
And Brian Zickapoose, right? He said, whenever we get someplace, first place I go to the smoke pit,
Right.
right? Marines standing around smoking, and they'll, what do they look like? How do they address you? Are these guys tight? Are they a disciplined unit or are they not? What is the state of police? Is there garbage everywhere? And so I'd be curious about your thoughts about that, Dale. How long, when you would go someplace, would it take you to form an opinion
Yeah,
about what you were going to see?
exactly right. And then, I mean, this damn another one of those calls. I still talk to Gunny Bodette, retired First Sergeant Bodette. I still call him Gunny Bodette all the time, and he always brings up how I chewed his ass when I come. I come into one of the positions in Afghanistan. He had just moved to. He was just moved into this position out of Kunar out down to Gardez. He hadn't been there 2 days, but the place looked like hell, and I wore him out. And I was like, you're disappointing me. You're supposed to be my guest, Gunny. And he still tells that story every time we get together. Right. And then I went away for about, 3 weeks, and I came back, and he had rocks painted and sand raked and all this stuff in combat. Right. Um,
No, that's how we
former,
do it. Well, first
right.
of all, just so everybody knows, you're going to meet Gunny Bodette, okay? Yeah, Dale told me I went up to Montana to work with the Bar-X project. He said, "Hey, these Marines that you're going to meet," said, "they're some of my favorite Marines of all time." And let me just tell you, Montana's big sky country, it wasn't big enough for these dudes. When you think of, right, when you think of in your mind staff NCOs, you think of Gunny Bodette. Gunny Bodette's got his own fan club on Facebook.
Right.
I joined it. I said, "You got a fan book?" He said, "You got a fan club?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "I need to
He is
join."
big. He is bigger than life. JC is another one now.
JC,
And
right?
J
No. And
and
let me
J
just tell you, and here's how what this whole series that I want to do
right.
is I wanted Dale to come on first, right? But you're gonna meet these guys. These guys are giant men. And when you think of a staff NCO, you think of these dudes, right? They are big, they are loud, they are smarter than shit, and they are tougher than shit. And they're good human beings. And I got a chance to meet them and spend a few days with them and just had, an absolute uh, wonderful time with them. And so no, and that's why this whole idea of what you do in garrison doesn't, and when you would now, and I'd be curious about your thought about this. You go on a Marine Corps base, a lot of times they don't look like they used to. They're not very in a very well state of police, right? And I'm being kind when I say that. Is that how you take care of your shit now? And what do you think is going to change if you don't pay attention, you don't take pride in the way the area looks and whatnot? I'd be curious about your thought about
Yeah.
that, Dale. When you see that, what do you think?
Well, I'd take issue with you that when I was CG at Camp Missouri, that we're pretty squared away. But you had to pay attention to it. I mean, I went around in my little book, with my facilities guys. I'm like, hey, we got to fix that. Hey, figure out how to get rid of all these cars. That was a big deal. I bet we had 50 abandoned cars on Camp Lejeune. And
What?
all, yeah, they half of them would be full of deuce gear. They Marines had just left and never turned their stuff in.
And
You'd
leave
find
and leave their
cars,
car?
yeah, cars with no engines, cars with no tires. The 4-story garages
Right.
had every one of them had several abandoned cars, abandoned boats. I mean, we cleaned up all of that. That took to get rid of because there's a whole process. You got to put a note on it. If they don't,
But
nobody
again, I would submit to you that that's symptomatic of,
walking around. That's from walking around leadership, though. You got to get out. You
yeah.
know, I've hired a guy to cut all the bushes all the way down the river so you could see the river. They were over 6 feet high. You couldn't see the river on River Road.
And again, just so everybody knows, that's not the Marine Corps we grew up in. Because
Right,
the Marine Corps we grew up in, we did it. There was nobody
right.
getting hired to do that. There were Marines out there, EPD Marines, your restriction Marines, all those guys, that's what they did,
No,
right? That's what they
yeah.
did. And now you'll hear, yeah, well, we can't make them do that anymore. Says who? Who
Well,
made that
yeah,
rule up?
that might change a little bit here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Our commandant has always been, yeah, he's been strict. He got in trouble as a division commander,
Right.
but for the reasons that we would say yes.
Oh no, when I saw that, I said, hell yeah.
Right.
That's something that's the kind of stuff that happened when you and I were young. I mean,
Right.
I joined the Marine Corps in 1983. If you were a staff sergeant or a captain, you had fought in Vietnam. And Vietnam was a no bullshit event where the Marine Corps fought up in Leatherneck Square, up by the DMZ, fighting the NVA regular units that would come to put your head on a stick, right? And they were hard dudes. They would talk about, the way the North Vietnamese fought at night,
Mhm.
right? And their field craft and all that. And they were no bullshit, man. It's going to be clean, right? And if it wasn't, I mean, I can't even envision it not being because we ever too afraid, too afraid, right? Marty Brantner, two-time Navy Cross winner, and the actions are like a week apart. I mean, his General Brantner, he's running around with like two-thirds of his right calf missing and a big chunk out of his thigh missing in his red silky shorts, like kind of wobbling when he ran. And we would see that and we'd be like, dude, it's hard, man.
General Sutton, Colonel Sutton, and then General Sutton was that way too.
Yeah.
The call sign was Cyclops because he was missing an eye, right? So he had a glass eye. He had a big old cut down the middle of his chest, right? Call sign Cyclops.
Yeah, when they told you
Uh,
to do shit and
right.
they came out and saw you in the field and they'd ask you questions. And these guys were going to the field, son of a bitches too, man. They lived in it, for
Yeah.
a
Well,
long
I mean,
time,
yeah.
man.
I mean, I tell people. So when I was a lieutenant, the three regimental commanders and the division commander had a Navy Cross. So it was Second Marines was Colonel Ripley. Sixth was Larry Livingston. Eighth was E. Toole Smith, and Keyes was the General Keyes. William Bill Keyes was the division commander. They all had a Navy Cross. I mean, that's who raised us.
I'm
They
in,
were,
hey, I'm in
and
Burger.
they were all at the O Club on Friday night. All of us
Oh, I'm with my buddy.
teaching at the O Club on Friday night,
I'm with my buddy
holding school.
Pete Flood, and we're in Burger King, main side at Camp Pendleton. And we're standing in line. I'm looking at the menu, and he says, "Hey, do you know who that is?" And I said, "No." Some colonel. He said, "That's Jay Vargas." I said,
Yeah,
"Who's that?"
yeah.
He said, "Man, he's a Medal of Honor winner, Vietnam."
I'm going to General Livingston's getting a field named after him on December 2nd at North Georgia College. And Livingston and Vargas were company commanders together and both won the Medal of Honor together.
And
So
and so
I'll
we
see him.
get
I'll see him here in a couple of weeks.
we get our food, and he goes, "Come on, let's go talk to him." I said, "Pete, come on, leave him alone. He don't want to talk to us." So Pete goes over. He goes, "Hi, sir. I'm Lieutenant Flood. This is my friend Mac. Right? We're in 1-5. Can we eat with you?" And he looks up and he says, "I really don't want to talk about it today." And and I said, "I told you." And he says, "Sit down." And we sat down and he was this whole idea of getting to know somebody,
Right.
guys, having lunch at Burger King and tells us, "Sit down, lieutenants." Right?
Let me give you a walking around leadership, and Finesse will tell you this. So I was the CG at the base. Dave was division commander. We had 10. I had 10 chow halls. So I would go to a different chow hall twice a week. So it'd take me a couple of months, 2.5 months to get around all 10 chow halls. And I'd just get a tray, and then Dave would go with me when he was division commander, and we'd just sit down with Marines. And they would just scoot over, and I was like, yeah, just sit down. And then they start talking. And that's walking around leadership. Just go to the chow hall, get a
And how
tray of
much do
food, and just sit down. And
how much do you find out doing walking around leadership?
all kinds of stuff. Good stuff though that
Right.
need to be fixed.
Right.
Barracks that didn't work, air conditioners that broke, toilets that don't work. I mean, just all the things, right? Yes, and they'll
Wait,
start talking.
wait, and they'll tell you, well, base and ID is only they've been closed down because and you're like, "What?"
Right.
Yes, or my wife's trying to get an ID, but we can't get an ID. And I mean, walking around and talking to them, and you learn all that stuff.
And to
And
use yeah, if you can use food, right? and the chow halls and other place. And you find out a lot of Marines don't eat there, they don't have enough time. You know, they're doing PT and their work, and then by the time they're finished everything, chow halls close in the morning, so they never get breakfast. I mean, those types of things. And as a division commander with Dave, you know, he fix that through battalion commander. Hey, I was talking to one of your Marines, says he never gets to eat breakfast because he, you know, by the time he cleans up and he has PT and gets child's closed. We got to change something. That was part of his rules, right? When he came out, right? Just by getting around, walking, and eating with Marines. So all of these issues here are hopefully something that young officers and staff and shows learn from. The reason I do these podcasts is for that reason, and I hope I can pass on some lessons learned,
All
some
right, so
ideas.
let me as we end this thing, give me the secret sauce, right? Is there secret sauce to leadership? Or, I mean, because the horizontal theme through just about everything you said, there's two horizontal themes. One is to be a leader of integrity because you got to put your head on your pillow for the rest of your life. The second horizontal theme is you got to know them. You got to know them as people, and first of all, it's pretty funny. Just I mean, Marines are funny, right? The stuff they'll say to you and how honest they'll be if you sit down and talk to them. But the fact that you got to know them, you got to know them as human beings. Is there any secret sauce, or is that I mean, that's pretty simple advice.
Yeah, it is simple advice. It's hard to do though. So you got to talk to yourself every day. Okay, I am going to get out, and so every day you got to find a way to get out and touch Marine souls. Every day, you got to you got to figure out some way to touch a Marine soul. Some days you can do more than others, but every day you should be. It's kind of like PT, right? You got a PT every day. You should be reading your profession every day. Somehow, some way, I'm going to read. I'm going to listen to a podcast. I'm going to read an article. I've got a book going. I'm listening to a book. You should have multiple things going, so you're always studying your profession until you're out. And us guys who did 37 years and they're still kind of, you know, doing this for a living a little bit, helping the Marine Corps still, I feel like, or in the job that I'm doing, I feel good about. But I studied, I still study. Like you said earlier, I try to find something on China every single day because I'm trying to help third division as a senior mentor. I've had the opportunity to go out and do that last year and a half. So I try to find something every day. And then when I find a decent article, I send it to I got 4 generals I'm sending articles to. Uh, and I send them 2, 3 articles a week, I guess, probably, uh, for them to do the same thing. And I got the time to do it now to screen through them and find the ones that I think that are pertinent to what their problem in front of them are. So those things. So, you know, PT every day, study your profession every day, and find a way to touch a Marine soul every day. If you can do that, you'd be pretty successful in the Marine Corps as a commander. And tell the truth and do the right thing. You ain't got to be belligerent about it, but you got, you know, and find a way to tell your boss, right, what you believe.
So let me ask. So if that gets you sideways with somebody, what would you tell somebody that say, you know, if I, you know, our relationship is such that if I say these things that I believe, I know it's going to probably keep me from commanding in the future, or maybe get promoted. What do you tell that person?
Well, you got to look yourself in the eye and say, am I not going to compromise my integrity and do the right thing? And that's where you got to act like every job you're in is the last job you're ever going to do, particularly as you move from battalion command up. That's the more important, even more so important, um, which ain't easy. But I've seen it though. I've seen guys that said, okay, this is it. I'm going to be a battalion commander. I'm getting out because I don't believe what's going on, or I'm leaving as a colonel, or I'm not going to command as a colonel because I don't believe what's going on.
Right.
Right. Or some would say, well, I'm going to fix it by staying within. Sometimes people compromise yourself to say that, maybe.
I've heard that a lot, because so I mean, and I've had a chance, I've had jobs that allowed me to see different things, and you see things that are troubling,
But
right? You see things that are troubling, and you ask, that's the response you get. Well, you can do that, and you get your 15 seconds of fame, and then you're done. And most of us believe we can achieve greater results if we stay in. But
what you can't do is openly dissent against your leadership while you're still in uniform. In
no, but
particular, in
that's not what we're talking about, right? And to me,
that is not what we're talking about,
no,
right?
we're not talking about that. We're talking about, you know, um, standing up and again in a very articulate way, and I would say in a very private way. I'll tell this is a funny story. I don't know why I thought of it, but when I went to Okinawa with my platoon in 1984, there was a big thing about alcohol-related incidents and minor offense reports. I got a sergeant just before I came over by the name of Tim Woolley, and he'd come from barracks duty as a squared away sergeant, and we went on a hump, and he hadn't been humping, and I think it was the 25-mile hike. He was wearing these leather boots, these jump boots. His feet were hamburger when we got done, but he did not fall out. I mean, blood. I mean, his feet were bloody stumps, and I remember like Woolie's a good dude, and so we go to Camp Hansen, Charlie Company 1-5. And so I come in one morning. There's a minor offense report on my desk for Tim Woolley. Came in through the gate with a lampshade on his head. Gave the Marines there some shit. I mean, typical Marine shit. And I got told my company commander wanted to see me. And I go down there, and he has a page 11 entry. He goes, "You need to have Sergeant Woolley sign this." And so I said, I'm a junior lieutenant in the battalion, second lieutenant in the battalion. So, and they're long, long, long buildings, right? They used to be company squad offices at each end, and then the Marines lived in the center and all that shit, washing machines and all that shit. I walk all the way back to where my lieutenant buddies are. And as I come in the office, they said, "What do you want to see you for?" And I said, I said, "This page 11." And I just shook my head. I said, "I'll be right back." I walk all the way back. He looks up. I said, "Sir, can I talk to you?" He said, "Come on in." So I went in, I shut the door. Now, here's what I don't realize. I don't realize that the walls don't go all the way to the ceiling. And the clerks are listening to this. So I said, "So you can't give Sergeant Woolley this page 11 entry?" And he looks at me and says, "Why not?" I said, "Sir, he's a good sergeant, right? He's only done good, and he made a mistake, and I will dig in his ass, and but I think this is wrong. I think this is wrong." And he said, "Give me that." So I handed it to him. He crumbled it up and he threw it at me, and I catch it, and he says, "The judgment block on your fitness report is riding on Woolie's ass. Good luck, Lieutenant." So I left, right?
But
I
the boys
leave,
heard it.
and they the clerk used to be in my platoon, right? He goes running over there, and about 3 months later, you talked about going around and checking holes. Well, you have to be when you're out in training. We're going to have 25% alert tonight. Well, if nobody goes hole to hole, guess what? You're going to have zero.
Right.
So I figured that
Go
out
close to it.
as a
Yeah.
lieutenant. So either me, my platoon sergeant, or one of the squad leaders had to be up going hole to hole every night. Well, we're doing team spirit. We're the lead element of the lead company going up the coast, the Western Coast Highway. I think it's Highway 7. And I get tagged as a casualty. So I get medevaced out to a ship. That night, right, we go into a defensive position. My staff sergeant doesn't do that. Koreans sneak into the position, steal an Alice pack that has a spare barrel for the saw in it. Now, the whole world has to be involved in it now.
Right.
So they told me I had to stay on that ship for 2 days. But that night, you know, I walked out to the flight director and said, "Hey, I just got told I can leave." He said, "There's another 46 coming in 10 minutes." I said, "Okay, hop on that." I go to 15 CP and I said, "Is there a truck?" So I get on. a truck going back to my platoon and my company. I get out, and my platoon sergeant looks at me. He goes, "Sir, I've never been so happy to see you in my life." And he said, I did something bad. I said, "What'd you do?" He said, and he told me what happened. He said, "You were right about that." Right, which is what you did. You did going to just checking on people, right?
Right.
And um, it was a lesson for me about supervising and about caring about them, and
But
it's
you're
just so.
going to do it right. You have to lose sleep. You have to. I mean, that's you don't have to eat as much. You don't get to rest. I mean, to do it right is hard. It's a
No,
lot easier. It's a lot easier said than done.
it's the right thing to do, and
It's hard.
these things are teach everybody about what it is to be better, and that's why it's so enjoyable and so fulfilling, but it was, and so we're sitting there talking, and
At the time, it's not sometimes.
no, and he's telling me, because you've got to report this ordinance being gone missing to like Crane, Indiana, where they track all this shit, right? So
Yeah,
this is not a small deal. And we were the first unit to deploy with the saw and all this stuff. And we're sitting on a tree, on a log, and he looked at me and goes, "You're a good lieutenant." And he and I didn't get along when I got there.
right.
He said, I said, "Well, thanks. That's all. What made you say that?" And he said, "Well, you don't know this, but you remember when Sergeant Woolley came through the gate?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, you remember when you went in and told Captain Bickham he couldn't do this?" I said, "What are you talking about?" And he looked at me and goes, "Don't play dumb with me, sir." I said, "How do you know about that?" He said, "Well, you don't know this, but the walls don't go all the way to the ceiling." And Pereira, right after you came out of that office, Pereira came running over and told us, right, that you stuck up with Sergeant Woolley.
And he went
He
to
said,
bat.
he said,
Yeah,
and you were a brand new lieutenant. He said, "You know what happened that day?" I said, "What?" He said, "You became our lieutenant that day
right.
because you went to bat for us, and that was the right thing to do." And so it's just funny how these little things, you know, um,
Mhm. And that's why we
happen.
love being Marines for so long.
Right. All right,
All those
Dale.
things.
First of
Yeah.
all, thank you as always for doing this stuff,
Mhm.
and again, I wanted for very important reasons, the kind of leader you are, and is I wanted to have you on and have you be the first person in this, but what it is to be a good leader, no matter what, and to do these things. So thank you very much.
Thanks, brother.
All right. That'll do it. That is my friend Dale Alford. And this series that I'm going to do, I'm going to bring on leaders, officer, enlisted, um, to just talk about what it is to be a leader. Is it different, right? And a lot of people will say it is. Okay, how is it different? But you got to get the same things done, right? You got to know them. You got to love them, right? You got to know them as human beings, not as Marines, and you got to help them. And if you'll help them, they'll do anything. They'll do anything. They'll fight anybody. They'll steal anything. Marines are crazy if they believe you care about them. So, and that's what, and you can't fake it. They know. They know. Do you spend time with them? Do you help them? Do you make them better people? If you do that, get out of the way, man. You'll be fantastically successful. And so again, I wanted Dale to be the first person to come on in this series, but you're going to hear from, as in you'll meet a whole bunch of other people that have their own stories. But what you're going to find out is that they all say the same thing about leadership, which is pretty fascinating. They're all strong personalities, come from very different backgrounds. But if you ask them what it takes to be good and what it takes to win under pressure, watch how similar the things they say are. So again, so thanks for listening. I hope this was enlightening for some of y'all, and uh, and so don't be afraid to like, share, and subscribe to this. And so in doing that, other people get a chance to see what you're doing, and maybe you get a chance to spread the word on this. So thank you very much for listening. Until next time, I'm out. Hi, this is Mike McNamara, and you're listening to All Marine Radio on your home for it, the one and only All Warrior Radio Network.